We are back on the Everton Byline. It is episode 8. And for the first time, we're here not talking about a Premier League loss for Everton and Paddy with some genuinely really good positive news to talk about because there have been good developments over Everton's takeover by the Friedkin Group. We will get into the nuts and bolts of all that a little bit later on, but how are you? Good to see you survived and dried off after the monsoon and engulfed the King Power at the weekend. It was absolutely ridiculous.
It was mad. We spoke to Abdoulaye Doucouré after the game, and he said it was possibly the worst weather he's ever played in his professional career. And Sean Dyche said afterwards as well that at the end of the first half, when it was at its worst, they actually couldn't see the other end of the pitch, the other side of the pitch from the dugout. I mean, that explains some of the quite bizarre decision making from the officials at various points, because some of the decisions to me were just completely mental. But a crazy afternoon in a whole load of ways. I got a lift back with Joe and Chris from the Echo, and I was telling you this off air, Matt. We went through biblical weather conditions on the way home. Thunder, lightning, puddles of water on the motorway as we're trying to get back around Stoke to Liverpool. So I don't know. After today's news about the Friedkin Group and everything else, it's never dull. I've just reached the conclusion that the club is absolutely mental and never won't be mental.
Well, do you know what? Like that. I know, like you're joking there, but like that does sort of take us into our first point, and I think like it's something I was going to hit on a bit, and obviously that is on Monday. So obviously we're recording this on Monday evening. It should be out Monday evening this week, so people could be listening to it on Monday evening or Tuesday morning as normal. Everton confirmed at 4:00 this afternoon that the Friedkin Group have reached an agreement to take over the club, obviously subject to ratification from the FCA and the Premier League, which we anticipate. And again, big fingers crossed here. We're going to have no issues. They will not have any issues passing Paddy. And, we don't want to hark back to last week too much. When anyone listened to us last week, we spoke quite a lot about John Textor and how he's portrayed himself in the media and all that kind of thing. And just going back to what you said there about this club never not being eventful, never being a circus around it. I think for me, and I obviously need to read more about the Friedkin Group and research into what they've done at Roma and the people who they're going to be putting in place at Everton potentially further down the line as well. But that's the thing that appeals to me about them the most, is that it feels like it's not potentially going to be a circus with them. And I think from my point of view, the thing with John Textor that kind of scared me was the Sky Sports interviews, the wild quotes, the multiple media briefings a day, about various different things. This sort of slapstick figure he kind of became towards the end of last week and over the weekend. That felt like very early Mashiri to me, and it was very harking back to those days where at the time we thought, this is, we kind of lapped it up, didn't we, a little bit with Mashiri, because it was all new and he thought he could potentially take us on. He spent a lot of money, all those things. But the Friedkin Group, the way in which they've gone about this, and it's been quiet. There's been murmurings and a few little reports here and there, but nothing major. No one coming out on the record saying anything. It's just been done and boxed off, all very, very quietly and very, very efficiently since June. And that, I think, that efficiency, that professional nature is exactly what Everton need for me.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely need more professionalism right at the top of the club, because if we're talking about ownership and executive levels at times, that there certainly hasn't been much of that in Mashiri's tenure. I think people will be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief at this latest news. Lots of red flags with Textor, as we discussed last week. Very public about a club and a situation that wasn't his yet. Some pretty controversial comments in there as well. And lots of stuff going on at Lyon that I think you need to really understand and unpack before you come to the conclusion that he's the right man for Everton. Now, obviously, Everton needed something, whether it was Textor, Friedkin, somebody else completely. But I do tend to agree with you. I think that this Friedkin deal has been done after the initial setback, this latest round of talks has been done with minimal fuss and has actually happened pretty quickly. What I would say is that when we were discussing Texter, we were always very clear that there were loads of obstacles to overcome here. And we were always really skeptical about him and his ability to complete this for a whole load of reasons, but obviously the big one being Crystal Palace. And he himself said to Sky Sports that because of the Palace part ownership, he actually couldn't formally, legally enter into exclusivity, and that meant that he could get gazumped. Now, the Friedkin Group never really went away. While their exclusivity elapsed, it collapsed. They never really went away. And because of the £200 million loan to the club, they were being kept abreast regularly on what was happening. And I think a deal basically opened up for them again on what I assume are more favourable terms right now. And they've bitten the bullet and gone for it. So I think there'll be a sense of relief here. It starts to feel a little bit like a circus with Texter. And while there are still some questions to ask about the Friedkins, how they fund this, we're hearing it's all equity, but at some point are they going to want to introduce long-term refinancing of loans? How they fund this, but also I guess what their vision for the club looks like and what they've done at Roma. I think for now it's a positive step. Everton, the start of the season's been tough for everyone. I think at times when you bog down in the mire with ownership and when the team is winless in the Premier League, fans and even myself at times at low points can often get into a place where we feel pretty despondent about what's going on and struggle to see a way out imminently. And you can talk about the new stadium and everything else, but there were still loads of issues to resolve. The ownership one's the big strand for everything, isn't it, really? When you look at the lack of finance, lack of investment in the squad, the need to take on these really high interest bearing short-term loans, basically just an attempt to keep things going. If you sort the ownership out, you give yourselves a fighting chance. And I think there's a lot more positivity around this latest one. It's not what it was with Texter, where Texter was speaking to Moshiri. This is an agreement to buy Moshiri's shares. And the hurdles now, by contrast, that they're still there and they're still significant, but they're not quite as strong and as big and as tall and as hard to overcome. Needs to be a resolution with ACAP through the courts, and I believe work is going on there and there's confidence there over an agreement, even though it's not there. But there also needs to be, of course, the Premier League's owners and directors test and regulatory approval. So these are not things that are expected to be an impediment. We'll probably overcome some of the toughest hurdles. And we can all start to, again, I don't do full-blown optimism with Everton. I probably do cautious optimism at best. We can all start to look forward maybe with that cautious optimism now.
Yeah, definitely. It was such a blow, I think, for me personally. I don't know how you felt when this fell through the first time, because it was the sense that not only have we got not necessarily dream owners necessarily, but seem like very capable people, very professional people who've worked in football before. Obviously got good links to all around the football world. Like that, it felt very much to me like they was going to be steady at worst, like that, and that was really encouraging. And the way in which it all fell apart, it just felt like to me like, oh no, we're going to be stuck with this 777 ACAP court case debt for such a long time, and we're going to be checking up the court files from New York and seeing what's going on there. And like that's nowhere near resolved, by the way. It's probably not the time to go into all that, but that's taken a twist over the weekend where I think 777 have filed a suit against Leadenhall. So that's in no way near being resolved. And
just to stop you though, Matt, that doesn't prevent other parties from presenting the court with solutions. And I believe one of the things that the Friedkin Group, for example, will do and has done is look at how that works legally and consult kind of the experts there. we have to remember that, like, and going back to your issue about despondence, we have to remember that this was an incredibly tough deal to get over the line, even to this point. Not only do you need to strike an agreement with Mashiri, not only do you need to some extent, guarantee the short-term and long-term viability of the football club, but you also have to strike agreements with all of Everton's existing stakeholders and creditors, the people that have lent them money. So that's right to media funding, and we believe that's in place already, in agreement with them to reduce the amount of debt Everton have taken on. ACAP/777 through the courts, tougher as we've mentioned, but in progress, and various others. And that's before you get to regulatory approval. So this is incredibly complex for anybody to get this done. And I wouldn't be wrong in saying that at various times, people haven't necessarily expected it to come off as quickly as this. I think there was a real sense of disappointment even inside Everton when that Friedkin deal collapsed, because they got to know each other, the club and Friedkin representatives, over that period of due diligence. I think there was an understanding that everyone could kind of work together and kind of build towards something. And very quickly that was eroded. And I think it's important for kind of the mental health of the club, for want of a better phrase, that there is signs of progress here and that people can push on. I don't just mean, by the way, supporters, and I don't just mean kind of people that are worried day to day about the financing of the club, but Sean Dyche, the players. Like, when there's just this mass kind of wave of chaos and stasis around the club, I think it's very hard to function. It doesn't let them off the hook, by the way, because they've made mistakes themselves, all of them. But I think it's hard to function. So I think this gives everybody a bit of a lift, and I'm hoping we do get to see the results of that soon.
Well, the death of leadership has been at the very top of the club, has been such a crippling factor, hasn't it? No, and I think we've spoken on this podcast recently about, just look at the board Everton have got at the moment. It's made up of an absent owner, an interim CEO, and somebody else, and that is not healthy for a club that. It's not necessarily a club that's sort of just ticking along and doing all right either. It's a club that's in desperate need of some reinvigoration and some fresh ideas. So from that point of view, it is absolutely necessary. But just sort of before we move on with this, in terms of timeline now, Paddy, I know it's been a bit mad today and fast moving, and this has all come out very, very quickly, but there are obviously still hurdles to overcome, as you said there. Maybe we're looking at like normal size hurdles as opposed to getting over a high jump or something like that. But how long do you think supporters will have to wait until it is finally rubber stamped, I's dotted, T's crossed, all that?
Yeah, so it's no exact science, this, because you're at the mercy of a number of respective bodies. We all know from the 777 process that you need approval from the Financial Conduct Authority, which 777 bizarrely managed to get. From the Football Association, although I don't think that's seen as quite as big a step as the two others. And then the really big one, the Premier League's owners and directors test, where effectively the Premier League are assessing the Friedkin Group's source of funding, see where their money has come from. As we know, it started off with cars, Toyota cars in Texas. So it's quite easy to trace in most ways. They've now moved into entertainment and have film companies and various other things. But also, I think it's a 3-year plan that is being assessed, a business plan, business case for Everton, the new club. Nobody I speak to thinks that will be a problem. That's not to say it won't be, but nobody I speak to thinks it'll be an issue. These things vary. So I think Jim Ratcliffe took weeks rather than months to resolve when he took part ownership of Man United. 777 took months and months, but I think that probably said more about 777 than it did about anybody else. So I think the idea is with Dan Friedkin on various UEFA and European Club Association bodies, the idea is that should in theory be rubber stamped pretty quickly. We might hopefully have something as a cautious estimate before the end of the calendar year, the end of 2024, which would be positive. Obviously, the sooner they come in, the sooner Everton can properly start to build towards the January window and the summer window and everything else. Let's see. That ACAP court resolution is still a key strand here. Like I say, everybody thinks they've found a workaround here, and they've taken advice on it, but they need the court to formally agree to that. And once those two strands are in place, then in theory, there's nothing stopping the Friedkin Group becoming Everton's new owners. So this has moved forward substantially, significantly. I think sometimes it's hard to see the wood from the trees with Everton, but that this is a big, bold leap forward.
Yeah, 100%. It's just those court proceedings in the United States, isn't it? We'll be keeping a bit of an eye on now, and I think that was the initial concern with them, wasn't it? And I think it is a civil case at the moment, isn't it? The one involving 777 and Leadenhall, but there's potential for it to become a criminal one. But hopefully, like you said, there's been an agreement reached which can give Everton a bit more protection, or certainly Everton's new potential owners a bit more protection regarding that going forward. Just thinking that you were talking about 777 and going back over the timeline, like do you think now when you look at the FCA granting them approval and Josh Wander sat in the director's box with his body double and pals and the statements on the club website, hopefully Paddy in 5 years' time when we're on episode 200 of this podcast and we're in the Champions League and in the Champions League and stuff like that, we'll look back and go, my word, what a massive bullet Everton dodged at that point, because things aren't great at the moment, but it feels like had a few other little things fallen different ways, then we could have been in an even worse, more perilous situation.
Yeah, and what you also have to remember is those loans totaling the best part of 200 million from 777 helped Everton get through last season remarkably. So I think we will look back on this period as a remarkable chapter in Everton's history and Everton's modern history. It is, as I think I've said to you before, Matt, it is entirely the outcome in terms of Moshiri's tenure that you would expect. You'd expect this kind of chaotic, fraud, frantic search right at the end of his time. It's entirely in keeping with everything that's come before us, as we know, where there are U-turns, there are twists and turns here, there, and everywhere. It's not so long ago, by the way, that we were more or less getting weekly media stories saying that John Textor was going to sign an agreement by the end of the week for his takeover. And of course, we were suspicious.
I'm going to cancel the Mangala loan now, out of in a fit of rage. Yeah,
fit of rage after Mangala makes his first Premier League start and does pretty well, all things considered, against Leicester. I thought, it's a remarkable chapter. What I would say is, as well, like, Dan Friedkin's an interesting guy. Like he's into his aviation. He flies planes. You only have to look recently at the situation at Roma to see that there are some issues there as well. I mean, they sacked Daniele De Rossi, the manager, who obviously is a club legend, and that went down terribly with the ultras. I think because of according to Italian reports at least, because of those fan demonstrations over the weekend, the CEO then resigned. So they've got loads of issues to resolve at Roma, and probably things have started to sour there a little bit. So we do need to be a bit more cautious. But I think had you told me 12 months ago when we were in the 777 mess, and even when the Friedkins first pulled out a few months ago, that we would be back here now, I'd have probably taken that, and I'd have taken that quite comfortably.
Yeah, without doubt. We'll have to wait and see, obviously, how it goes. But if you watch us on YouTube, let us know what you think about the takeover. Are you happy? Are you nervous? Are you not going to get excited until you see Dan Friedkin? Maybe not even sat in the director's box, because we've had that, haven't we, with Josh Wander, and he's still not taking over as... what's the equivalent for owners, Paddy, for holding up the shirt or playing on the pitch?
Some of them probably...
Cutting the ribbon at Bramley Moor, maybe, something like that.
But some of them do. I've definitely seen 777 out on the pitch at Genoa and various other places holding up shirts and whatever else. I mean, what would you get, like a Friedkin number 9 shirt on?
Would you take, surely number 1 if you're the owner? Come on. Number one on a blue home shirt would look weird. So that's
What
big. I don't
about
know.
like Friedkin 200 for the amount of money he's put in so far?
He paid 777.
Yeah.
I mean, open to ideas from our listeners and viewers as well. How can Dan Friedkin commemorate buying Everton? Maybe just get him one of those tiles on the Bramley-Moore Way with his name on or something like that. That'd be nice.
We need to get it. He needs to get it over the line first, Matt, doesn't he? And we say that because we know what Everton's like, and there've been so many false dawns. So I mean, forgive us that little bit of caution there. But I think most
was out, Paddy.
It's the same with new signings, isn't it? I mean, that kind of famous thing of I won't believe it until I see them there in a blue shirt. I mean, like you say, what is the owner equivalent? I won't see them until they're there in a cramped seat in Goodison's director's box watching Everton lose 3-0 at home to Southampton. But I mean,
even then,
it's been a chaotic few days. It's definitely been a chaotic 24 hours for every journalist. But at least in this case, like I say, it feels more positive. It doesn't feel apocalyptic. It's not like when the Friedkin thing happened last time, 777 collapsed, and you are actually just scratching your head wondering, well, how do Everton make ends meet now? This is a step forward.
Absolutely. We'll step forward in the show as well. We've got a couple more points to go into, obviously a bit quicker than that first topic, which is always going to dominate the discussion today. But just wanted to quickly touch, Paddy, on Kevin Thelwell's interview did last week with Julia at the BBC. Came out ahead of the game at the weekend, spoke about a variety of different topics. But the most interesting stuff for me was stuff around the manager. Obviously, that was the first thing that Julia asked him about, and obviously there's growing speculation about Dyche ahead of the weekend. And I think it was interesting that he kind of lumped himself in there with Dyche in the sense of this is collective responsibility. They work. They made a point about how they work so close, closely metaphorically and closely, quite literally as well, in terms of how close their office are together. Talked about the signings and the way the team's set up and the support structure that he provides to the manager. And he backed him emphatically as well, and obviously tried to provide some context to the poor start to the season and the poor results, which is kind of what you expect. He's not going to come out and necessarily throw him under the bus, but in the same breath, I thought it was really quite interesting the way in which, like I said, it felt like he was putting himself in there with him, and there was a sense of collective responsibility for all this, which I suppose if he's going to do on the record in these interviews, then maybe going forward, if things are going well, you look at them as a pair, and if things are not going well, maybe a bit more inclined to look at them as a pair as well.
Yeah, I mean, he, as you say, he can't throw the manager under the bus, can he, publicly? And certainly that wasn't the point of the interview. The idea in the interview was to, I believe, if you look at the key messaging that came out, it was, we back the manager. It's not just his fault, of course. Here's what we're doing to try and solve these problems, and here's how we're looking forwards. And I think there is probably a case of collective responsibility here, or at least that's what they see it as. We've spoken previously about kind of Everton's lack of pulling power, lack of financial prowess in the market, which has obviously taken its toll. But we've also discussed Jordan Pickford, for example. He hasn't had a great start to the season. James Tarkowski hasn't been brilliant. Idrissa Gueye's given away goals. There's been loads in there, and ultimately the buck probably stops with the manager and, to an extent, the director of football. But this was a continuation, really. I saw this as an attempt to back Dyche publicly and alleviate some pressure on him from the fan base, but also an attempt to reassure, basically. An attempt to reassure that they were working hard, they are trying to come up with solutions, they are leaving no stone unturned, is I think that the phrase that was used. And in that sense, it was very much a continuation on the messaging that's been out there for the last couple of weeks, isn't it? I mean, go back to the story I wrote first week of the international break about Dyche being safe for that period, and why he was considered safe. Those messages were again emanating from the club after the 2 defeats to Villa and then Southampton in the Cup, and again this now publicly from the director of football, Kevin Thelwell, didn't surprise me massively, based on everything we've said there. And I think they will take the view that it's too early in the season to make these calls anyway. As we've said previously, Matt, those big bold changes tend to come when you get the ownership shifts and when you move into a new situation. So one of the first questions, I guess, for the Friedkin Group to answer, as and when they become the new incumbents at Everton, is what are they going to do with Dyche? And also, what are they going to do with Thelwell? Both of those two are into the final less than a year on the deal now. And there probably needs to be an urgent resolution there. Certainly, I would argue less so with Dyche, but more so with the director of football, because the director of football is the one that brings every strand together. I think Thelwell called it the support system for Dyche, didn't he? So that's basically the person that oversees the recruitment, sports science, analysis, academy, all those different spheres that sit around the first team. The one that oversees all of those. So when you're talking about planning for the future, they're arguably as critical, if not more so, than the manager himself. So that adds to the sense that we need to have some form of ownership clarity, and hopefully sooner rather than later. It was an interesting interview in a whole load of ways, and obviously credit to Julia for broadcasting it and getting it and asking the right questions, all that kind of stuff. They obviously spoke about Dele Alli for a bit as well, didn't they? Given the thoughts on Dele, again, a continuation of some of the themes we've been exploring over the past few months, even on this podcast. What did you make of the comments on Dele?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think it's. I don't think he's going to play for it ultimately. So I felt like there was a spell during the summer. I think when we spoke about it, when there was talk of a deal being on the table and stuff like that, maybe, but it felt like he might come back into it. But it just seems to have faded away a little bit. And I think potentially the intrigue in him around our fans, and I know Julia mentions a lot. She gets asked about him pretty much every single day.
Yeah.
I think that's probably more to do with him as a character and quite a complex personality more than anything as a footballer.
It's a story as well, isn't it? I mean,
he's a huge name, isn't he? Like he's a huge name. He's probably the best young footballer on the planet at one point. There is we see this in our workplace. Despite the fact he hasn't played football for Everton for 18 months, 2 years now. You're probably looking at, I don't even know. But when you do a story about him, there is wider interest in there, not just from
Everton,
but
Tottenham, England fans. Yeah.
It will go on like the national sites, and I'm sure there'll be, say yourself, you do a story for the Athletic about him, it will go on the broader football sections as opposed to say a story would about Ndiaye or McNeil's change of position, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely got a broader appeal, as you say. I think people like a redemption story as well, don't they?
Yeah.
They like the idea that Dele's had really tough times. Most of them seemingly not of his own making, some really difficult kind of struggles, and he's trying to come out of them for all intents and purposes. So I think people want to see that story have a positive ending, and that's not just Everton fans, but it's just football fans in general. We all remember what he was like on his day for Spurs in England. We all remember, by the way, closer to home, the second half against Crystal Palace, where he made a huge difference in helping Everton get that win and keep them up that year under Frank Lampard. He's obviously not played for an awfully long time, and it would take him quite a while to get up to speed. I still think the biggest thing holding this back is his availability to play games. He's not yet in a place. He is doing some training with the first team, but he's not yet in a position where he's doing it all the time, and he's not yet in a position where, because he's not contracted, he can't do what Jared Branthwaite and Nathan Patterson did the other night, which is go to Southport up the coast in the teeming rain and playing a 4-3 win against Sunderland's under 21s. He can't do that. It would have to be behind closed doors. So there are, we like the word hurdles on this podcast. There are still some hurdles that aren't there in terms of him getting back to to where he might want to be and where Everton might want him to be. I don't think that door's closed. I really, really don't. And that was actually based on our reporting over this summer, but also reaffirmed by what Kevin Thelwell said. But there's still a way to go in that story. I mean, the idea of him coming back and playing for Everton is just it's romanticism, isn't it? It'd be lovely. It'd be absolutely lovely.
Well, I don't want to just come back and play. Like, I think if he came back and played and was like the player we saw even before this layoff, like that would be a bit sad. Like, I think the only way it really works, like in my head, and comes back and I'd feel good about it if he was like good and could affect the team. And you're right. I think you're right about the Palace game. But like again, I remember the club put like a highlights package out of that second half, and it wasn't like as good as I remember it being in the ground. It was just getting on the ball, playing 5-10 yard passes, and just calming what was a mad situation. Which I suppose in some senses does make it really good because it was frenzied in there, wasn't it?
But big game. That's big game experience, isn't it? And that's know-how, and that's ability to play the situation in front of you. And manage the crowd and the atmosphere and the pressure and all those kind of things. You would expect somebody like Dyche to be able to handle that situation more so than players that haven't been involved in those occasions. The other thing as well is, you'll know yourself, but being in the ground, sometimes you just get a completely different perspective on players than when you're watching on TV. Like when I went to Villa Park the other week, it was so apparent to me in the stadium how much Dominic Calvert-Lewin was dominating their two centre-backs and how much he was troubling them physically. And you can probably get a bit of the sense of that on TV, but you're much closer to the action in the stadium. You can see everything and the way players are interacting, the body language, all the stuff when the cameras aren't rolling. And I think that was probably the case as well for Dyche. So I guess we'll have to see whether he can keep himself fit and whether he can play games and whether he can make the next step and kind of get that prove himself and get that deal over the line. But I do still think the door is open.
Yeah, and the most apparent player, I think, what you just said there for me was David Silva. Like just when you saw him live, you realise like the appreciation of space, the way the position he took up, the way he took the ball, all those sorts of things. And Gareth Barry was great at that as well. One of those players you didn't realise how good he was until you saw him actually in the flesh in the stadium. But yeah, fingers crossed he can get back there. But it's going to be fascinating anyway. The club certainly not giving up on him based on what Kevin Thelwell said. Very final point, Paddy. Nice positive one to finish. Goal scorer at the weekend, of course. Ndiaye following up on his man of the match performance against Bournemouth with his first Premier League goal. Lovely goal as well, wasn't it? Great take, great pass from Ashley Young, of course. Great take, moves it well, and then comes back across the keeper. And he was just moments in that game where it just kind of takes your breath away with his quick feet and his balance. And the thing that like struck me about him, I think we spoke about him after the Bournemouth game and said, he reminds me of P&R, but certainly watching us on Saturday, and I think this was even more apparent in the hail and the rain and the wind whistling around that ground. It feels like every other player in our team, when they've got the ball at the feet, are just desperate to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and the frantic and the panicking with it. Whereas when it comes to him, he seems more relaxed when he's got the ball at his feet than when he's not. He always wants it, he gets it, and he does that little thing, doesn't he, where he just rolls his foot over the top of the ball, gets his head up, and then he can play a pass or he can just drop his shoulder and go. And very early days, but we've had nothing to cheer so far this season. So people who watch us on YouTube will see it put the banners, the comments of Everton struck gold with eliminating Ndiaye, but it feels very much like they have, doesn't it, so far? Because he's a lovely footballer to watch.
Yeah, we've said it a few times now, but like on his day, just a joy to watch. The kind of player that you would pay good money to go and see, and Everton haven't had enough of those players over the years. I think going back to the goal, obviously really impressive how he took the pass from Young and weaved his way inside and put it in the near post. Very reminiscent, I felt, of his goal against Tottenham for Sheffield United, if anybody hasn't seen that in the FA Cup a few years ago at Bramall Lane. But what I really loved was what you were saying there, where he almost suckered the defenders into coming out. The whole Leicester backline, he was kind of dwelling on the ball, delaying the pass, and you could see them getting edgy and coming out towards him. Dwight McNeil makes a lovely run as well to take away one of the, I think it's the holding midfielder in Ndiaye, and allow Young to play that ball. And I just thought, if Everton played like this a little bit more often, instead of just banging that ball long, and that they took their time and they used the qualities of some of these players, then we'd see more football like that, and we'd probably see some better performances still from people like Iliman and Ndiaye. He's another one for whom the stats don't really do him justice. Like if you go on a stats page as I do after every game, just to look at how players have fared in those metrics, you'll struggle to find something with him that really, maybe apart from his progressive carrying, everything else just looks like run of the mill. But if you watch him in the stadium and you watch him on TV, he just lights it up, and he's so hard to pin down. I loved his move in the first half with Dwight McNeil very early on, where he wriggles free down the left and puts a great ball in. He completely puts the afterburners on with Wout Faes in the second half, and just puts one over the bar, doesn't he? But I thought that was Everton's best overall. That was Everton's best first half of the season, admittedly against poorer opposition, probably their weakest opposition of the season so far. Thought they had more control with Mangala and Decore in the middle. We've spoken on previous podcasts about it maybe being a bit too much too soon for Timmy Rabunam and them needing to get a bit more experience and nous in there. Dyche took the decision to bring Rabunam out and spoke a little bit in depth when I asked him about it after the game. Spoke about just trying to protect Tim, just trying to get a bit more experience and legs in there in midfield. I thought Lindstrom again didn't take his chances, of course, but I think he brought something different in the threat in behind, which Everton have lacked. Some like real pace at times, and they obviously struggled when he went off. So I can start to see it coming together a bit more in the final third, and even the midfield showed signs of improvement. The one thing that we're just going to drone on and on about, and I could have written 4 pieces on it in the last week or two, it's just Everton's inability to control games that they're ahead in. Like they just seem to retreat, get worse and worse on the ball, leave Calvert-Lewin more and more isolated, and then they either don't turn to the bench and look knackered, or they do, and the new players that come on don't really seem to do it. I thought I couldn't believe it when Decore, playing so well in central midfield, went to number 10 and Irabunam dropped deep. Leicester just started running through Everton. And Jack Harrison, I can understand that, so Harrison for Lindstrom, but it left Everton lacking an out ball. Dominic Calvert-Lewin looked gassed, by the way, after leaving the line on his own. So it's that familiar trope of Everton not being able to manage it, Dyche not being able to stem the tide. And it's a shame because we'd love to be doing more of have Everton struck gold with Iliman and Ndiaye, because the answer is it looks like they have. Very early days, but he looks the business.
I think you're right about Lindstrom. But I don't know if you heard post-match, but Dave was writing him off effectively, but not like Dave. But I thought he was fine. I think you're right. And,
good.
We've spoken a lot about P&R, obviously, during his time at Everton and Ndiaye and the comparisons there. But I think what made that team good was that if you look at the wingers we typically had, so Morales was typically on the right, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And in those two wingers, you had 2 players who played in the same position on different sides of the pitch, but they were so different in how they went about it. P&R would drop in, he'd make the extra man in midfield, he'd get the ball into feet, turn, spin, and that's kind of what Ndiaye does, doesn't he? Whereas Morales was a bit more frustrating, a bit more direct, but he would make that run in behind, wouldn't he? And he'd keep the width a little bit better on the right-hand side. And all of a sudden, you've got different types of threats on each flank. And listen, Lindstrom, first start, poor in the final third, admittedly, and Morales wasn't an amazing player for Everton, but he was a good, productive player for Everton, and I don't want to compare him to him yet, but stylistically, you can see a bit of that on each side of the weekend. We had something a little bit different. We had Lindstrom, who's probably a bit more prone to running behind, wants to get in the box for crosses, bit more shot happy, bit more direct, and then Ndiaye, who's that kind of wide playmaker sort of player, if you will, that the P&R was.
I'm really interested to see how this develops, because he does, for the first time, Dyche, have options in those positions behind the striker. I think McNeil and Harrison might be, on most occasions, too samey to be on the wings in the same team
They're very
And that-
predictable as well, aren't they? Like they've got the merits as players, but they are very predictable. I think in how McNeil on the left, you know exactly what he's going to do. Harrison on the right, you know exactly what he's going to do.
I think Lindstrom's pace genuinely does terrify the opposition. I thought there was some good stuff in there, like the shot that Hermanson parried in the first half was really good, and would have been a belter if it had gone in. A few other occasions when he obviously still needs to brush up, and we obviously know about the 2 missed one-on-ones against Southampton. What we have to remember with Lindstrom is that he missed basically most of last season at Napoli. He hardly played. But if you go back over his record at Frankfurt when he was doing really well, he was actually finishing pretty clinically. You could go through any highlights reel on YouTube with European techno music, and you'll find clips, chips, lashed finishes across the keeper, curled finishes. He's got all of that in his locker, but I think it'll take a little bit of time for him to bring all of that out. Dyche praised him after the game, though, and I think the thing Dyche will like is that he worked really hard. You could see him closing down, winning the ball back. I think he had the most tackles in Everton's team and won all of his tackles. He was regaining the ball. So Dyche will like all of that, I think. And it just seemed to me that you used the word balance. We used the word balance last week to discuss the central defensive partnership and why Jared Branthwaite's such a big miss there. I think that balance of having one winger who can come in and receive the ball and then spin, and having one winger that just breaks the lines of the opposition, I think that works really well. So I'd like to see him stay in for now. The end product needs work, but I'd like to see him stay in now. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of both of them, because they are at the very least exciting, aren't they?
Yeah, 100%. Well, how nice was that? Loads of positive stuff there, wasn't there?
Makes a change. I mean, like I'll be honest, Matt.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, Matt. I have had to reattach my head to my shoulders today because of just Everton being the way Everton are with the news cycle.
In a good way today, though. It's like, yeah, it's just nice to see like that little, quite a big ray of light coming through the dark cloud that's engulfed Everton over the past God knows how many years. But nice to talk about football as we like watching, and
I thought Mangala was good, by the way, as well. If we want to,
he was steady, wasn't he? He was really steady, and I think you're right about the core. I think he was fine as a holding midfielder, in the right place, right time, a lot for some of those crosses. So just frustrating, isn't it? Like don't want to go too negative, but like the goal we conceded and the way they finished the game, but there was good stuff in there. So
blank it out. Take one of the pills from Men in Black and blank it out, and we'll concentrate on some of that. We've had more than enough negativity already this season, haven't we? So, like you say, nice to talk about some of those things. I think the big piece is obviously the takeover, and that's the thing that needs to continue to progress and continue to go well. But just maybe I'm hoping, and famous last words, I'm hoping maybe everyone gets a bit of a boost from that, and everyone takes that into Saturday's game, gets back to Goodison being a kind of that kind of fortress and making it a really tough game for Crystal Palace, because they need a win from one of these 2 home games at least, don't they? They really, really need a win. I'm already excited about going back to see Ilman and Ndiaye now. This is what today's done to me.
Oh, look at this. There's Paddy. Up the toppies. There we go. Leave us your positive vibes in the comments if you're watching us on YouTube. Leave us a rating, leave us a review, all those sorts of things on your iTunes and Spotify, with a positive comment as well about this show if you're enjoying it, and potentially about the toppies as well if you're feeling upbeat like me and Paddy. We will have all the usual stuff this week. We'll have weekly, we'll have Summer's Week, we'll have weekend preview, mailbag, and Blue Monday with Les and Dave is already out on YouTube and on your podcast feeds as well. So that has been the Everton Byline. We'll be back again next Tuesday to reflect the game against Crystal Palace. Cheers for tuning in. Up the toppies.